And here we are, I think. I think we are, because I always get something wrong without Creaky, so I could be here thinking I've successfully done a stream, and I could just be talking to myself again. So if anybody's watching in the chat, if you could let me know whether you can actually hear us, because I don't want another Professor Dave on my hands where I'm talking and nobody can be heard. So Neil Sullivan says, yeah, Brainless Steel says no sound. Now, I don't know if he's joking or not, though. Have we actually got sound? Someone let me know, please. Oh, we might not have any sound. I don't know. We'll find out. Somebody let me know. Can hear you. Brilliant. Oh, hi, Simon. How are you doing? So you okay? Right, so everything's fine. We can be heard. So it's a Friday night debate. Obviously, this Wednesday we had the chat. We had the Let's Chat and we had the ghost stories, etc. Because this week's main debate was scheduled for the Friday to accommodate time zones and stuff. I will let the debaters introduce themselves right now, starting with Dave, and then they can tell you how the debate come about and we can just get straight into it. So Dave, over to you, sir. Just introduce yourself, please.
Thanks. So my name is David Levy. I live in Israel. The thing that's relevant to this debate for me is that I play rugby and I'm keenly involved in sport. So that is my primary interest. This debate came about because I saw Goddess Granny absolutely rip apart someone on a different channel, and I thought that she would provide a much better opponent than the previous one, and that is about everything I have to say.
Because of course you were debating on here a couple of weeks ago, weren't you, against Vincent on is there evidence, reason to believe in God? That was it, and I enjoyed that. I thought it was a fun debate. He was quite a character, wasn't he? Godless Granny, introduce yourself.
Okay, I am Godless Granny. My real name is Kelly Pearsall, so if you hear Dave call me Kelly, that is perfectly fine because that is my name. I have a YouTube channel and I talk about a little bit of just about everything. I am interested in this topic because I am a trans parent as well as a trans ally. My introduction into the whole world of transgender actually is fairly recent. If you look, I have a video out called Transgender for Beginners, and I kind of learned this as I went along. And then it was only about a couple months after I put out that video that my son came to me and told me that he was trans.
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to this because I think the topic itself is one that. I just think it's a really fascinating topic, and obviously the way that the world's going at the minute, it's something that's going to become more and more discussed. So I am looking forward to it. How did the debate come about between the two of you? You said you'd saw each other. Dave, you'd seen Godless Granny debating this against somebody else.
No, it wasn't this particular topic. It had to do with, I think it was, are women treated as equal Bibles? In the Bible?
Yeah, it was are men and women equal in the church? In the Christian faith.
And what was the outcome of that? Yes or no?
My opponent really didn't say much of anything that was even worth addressing, so I kind of sat there and waited for him to make an argument. He never really did.
Right. Well, I think you had a similar experience, Dave, with our last debate that you were on here. But tonight, I've been speaking to both of you off air for a bit, and you're both extremely articulate, both extremely civil as well. So this is going to be a great discussion. I think as a moderator, I'm going to be pretty redundant tonight, so I'm just going to sit back and make a load of technical errors, if that's okay. So for the opening statement. Dave, if you'd like to go first, and
no, I have the first opening statement.
Oh, sorry. See, I got it wrong already. And we only said that just before we went on air, didn't we? Right. Sorry, Godless Granny, for the opening statement. Fire away.
Okay. Does any reasonable person think that trans women should be barred from competing with cis women for academic scholarships, in an essay contest, for Pell Grants, job opportunities, a cooking competition, hairstyling? Barring trans women from these is absurd, yet this is the question that I was presented with when I was asked to debate, should trans women compete with cis women? While it was clear that the producers of the debate intended the topic to be about trans women in sports, that was not the topic as it was given to me. Rather, I was given this overly broad topic regarding competition in general, as opposed to competition in sports in particular. Competition between women, cis or trans, is healthy, an integral part to society, and it is why competition should not be prohibited or discouraged. To be fair, I was given a choice of 2 topics, and we are debating this one by my choice. However, as much as the topic that we are debating is overly broad, the other topic that I was offered was overly narrow. It asked, do trans women have an unfair advantage in sports? Since the only difference between trans women and cis women are some minor physical differences, this topic would allow us only to address the physical attributes and hormone levels in trans and cis women, ignoring the social, developmental, and emotional aspects of sports competition. In short, I was given the option of trying to cover too much or ignoring the most important reasons for why trans women should not only be permitted in competition with cis women, both in sports and outside of sports, why such competition should be embraced and encouraged. Thus, I chose the former option. In the area of sports, there are 2 main categories, social sports and competitive sports. In social sports, there is no reason to bar trans women from competition. Other than transphobia, why would you possibly not allow a woman to compete on a company women's softball team or bowling league? The primary purpose of such teams is social. According to Huffington Post, sport has an endless array of purposes to inspire, engage, motivate, and transcend. Hopefully, the purposes of sport will continue to provide visibility and create space where social change and human rights can become the core purpose of sport. Opening that safe space would represent positive change in the sports culture. Including trans women in social sports allows them to feel included. It gives them a place where they can be one of the girls. It promotes acceptance and understanding of them as women. These opportunities also allow cis women who have little contact with trans women to form bonds that transcend differences. Since there is no advantage that trans women have in achieving these goals, I can think of no reason to ban them from social sports. This brings us to competitive sports. The primary reason for banning trans women from competitive sports is that they might win. Yet on a daily basis, coaches tell their teams it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. According to Tim Tebow, we play a sport. It's a game. At the end of the day, that's all it is, a game. I think by keeping that mentality, it really keeps things in perspective for me to treat everyone the same. And this is what trans women seek in sports, just like cis women. A chance to be treated the same, a chance to be included, a chance to compete, a chance to lose, and maybe a chance to win. Do trans women even have a competitive edge in sport? There is insufficient data in the area of research to claim a definitive answer. Most of what is currently available indicates that there is no overall competitive advantage. When transition occurs before puberty, studies show that there is no difference. When transition occurs after puberty, HRT can bring testosterone levels to a net zero level. Advantages do remain in limb length, height, and fast twitch muscle fibers, but these advantages are only an advantage in some sports, and these advantages are sometimes counterbalanced by disadvantages. Thus, to bar trans women from sports entirely is to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because trans women have altered their bodies, the burden of proof is on them to show that that alteration has a net zero effect on their ability to compete as female athletes, similar to the case of Oscar Pistorius, who, when told that his prosthetics gave him an unfair running advantage and he was disqualified, successfully argued that the disadvantage of his prosthetics in start time and maneuverability caused him to have a net zero advantage. More work must be done to prove a net zero effect from transition in order to achieve fairness in sports. The problem is that leveling the playing field isn't really the goal. Discrimination is. From The Science of Sport. For most of humanity's existence, sport was for men only. Unfortunately, biology does not neatly divide human beings into 2 sexes. There are millions of people who are either intersex or transgender. Intersex and transgender people have rights too, including the right to compete in sport. That we have not yet perfected a method to protect women's sport as intended does not justify excluding an entire people group from competitive sport. Rather, we have more work to do in finding a way to be inclusive. Are transgender athletes in competitive sports even a significant problem? According to the New York Times, contrary to fears expressed by some, there has been no large-scale dominance of transgender athletes in women's sports. The physical advantages that some transgender women have with larger lungs and bones are counterbalanced with disadvantages by having less muscle mass to manipulate those larger bones. Sports, even competitive sports, is about more than just winning. If the goal is in fact to level the playing field, then we need to continue to work to find ways to reach that goal, such as through regulation of testosterone level limits, not by banning trans women and or intersex women from sports competition. But not all sports are competitive, and not all competitions are sports competitions. And not all sports competitions are based on physical attributes or abilities. Transgender men and women are a marginalized segment of the population. The harm caused from banning them from sports entirely far outweighs the benefit derived from fairness in a few categories of female elite sports. Emotional issues transgender people face stem primarily from a society that does not embrace them for who they are and include them in places where they belong. The very question that we are debating, framed as it is, should trans women compete with cis women, is evidence of that bias and marginalization. Because competition is a way to socialize, interact, and build relationships, there is absolutely no question that trans women should not only be permitted to compete with cis women, such competition should be encouraged. Despite minor instances of physical differences leading to a potential competitive edge in some competitive sports, the solution is to find a way to include trans women, not exclude them. When everyone is included, everyone wins. Jesse Jackson.
Right. Brilliant. I love it when people come prepared. Thank you very, very much for that. Excellent start. For those people who are in the chat, I'm just putting a link in the chat now, which is going to take you to our community poll where you can just leave questions rather than tagging me in the chat, because there's only me tonight, not Creaky. Questions will get missed. But if you go to that link when it's question time, I will pick them all up from the end there. Right. Anyway, Dave, lots to live up to on that one. Are you ready?
Oh yeah, I am ready. Do you have the presentation?
You're testing my technical skills now, mate. Do you think I have the technical skills to put a PowerPoint up? I'm not sure I do. Let's have a look. Boom. Look at that. Now, I'm going to get something wrong. So let me know when you want the PowerPoint up. I'm just going to make it a bit bigger.
As soon as it's up.
It's up now, mate.
Okay, so you tell me when to go and we can go.
Right, off you go.
Okay. So, hello to one and all. Thank you to Catz for hosting us, and thank you to Kelly or Godless Granny for agreeing to this debate. For me, we have two competing values over here. On the one hand, we have inclusiveness. On the other hand, we have health, safety, and fairness. I don't take the subject lightly because I know how much value sport can add to a person's life. My position is that when it comes to, in particular, contact sport, the evidence is not sufficient enough to show that trans women, after having undergone hormone replacement therapy, have mitigated the advantages of male puberty. So we can go to the first slide, or the next slide, please.
Okay.
This is just a word. Okay.
Got it, yeah.
This is just a few words on desegregation. If we take a look at the times for the IAAF meet in Doha last year, if you look at the fastest men against the fastest woman, there is no comparison about who would be the ones being represented. There's no way to. Clearly, the men will be the ones who will be represented, and they will the ones be inspiring and motivating the next generation. If we can go to the next slide, please. And this is just the world. This is our records for bench press at powerlifting. And if you look at the heaviest lift by the female, it is still lower than the lightest male who was able to bench press that particular weight. Now, if you take also a closer look at the ratios, men were typically able to lift between 1.8 to 2.9 times their body weight, while the best ratio for women was around 2.1. If sports are desegregated, there goes visibility, there goes inspiration, there goes motivation, by and large, because it is clear that one gender will be potentially overrepresented. We also desegregate according to age. If we go to high school, we have under 14, under 15, under 16 categories, because we're aware of how puberty will affect the body. And we also have over 40 categories, that being people who are over 40 years old, they have their own category because we're aware of how the body changes over time. So if we can go to the next study, next slide, please. So this is one study, and I do agree with Granny that there's not a lot of studies out there. So what I've gone through is just what's available to me right now. So this is one study showing that even after 12 months of hormone therapy, that trans women in particular were able to maintain certain strength levels. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that their bone density and the skeletal structure are well preserved, which is, when it comes to contact sports, those are two very crucial components. In the next slide, you should see, what was it, on the calf.
What should be on the slide now? Which slide should we be on, mate? Sorry. The one that says preservation of volumetric bone density.
The next one, measurement of gender differences in gastrocnemius muscles and tendon using sonomography. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is just showing the differences between those who've gone through male puberty and those that have gone through female puberty. Once we look at this, and if someone does want to go and look at that study, and they can see the power being able to, that is able to be generated by the male, then it's no wonder that those particular records that we saw earlier look the way they look. And I'm also very happy that Kelly brought up the case of Oscar Pistorius, because if we go into the next slide, what we're going to see is that, if you can see, what I've highlighted at the bottom is that the IAAF in its initial tests did not pose the right question if Oscar Pistorius had a net advantage. It was shown later that, as Carlos Granning said, that he was at a net disadvantage. However, the issue isn't if the person will be able to win all the gold and all the silver and all the bronze. The issue is that person's performance. How would they be able to perform, and at what level would they be able to perform? And so far, the evidence that we have seen in sciences, in biology, is that there's insufficient evidence to show that the hormone replacement therapy has successfully mitigated the advantages of male puberty. If we're going to the next slide, there should be a study by Dr. Devine.
Is that the one that's got the number 104 next to a paragraph?
No, sorry. I should have said that's.
Sorry, I skipped.
What's nice about the last one is it goes into about how the case of Oscar Pistorius, it does create an additional burden that must be viewed as the challenges of 21st century life, which we'll get to, I think, a bit later. The next one is gender steroids and fairness in sport. So granted that study has to do with mice because it has yet to go into human testing, but what they're able to show was that once you take away the testosterone from mice, the additional testosterone, that those muscles are still able to recruit more muscle fiber. The effects of steroids does not disappear once the person has stopped taking steroids. So in a very similar way, someone who's had the advantages of male puberty still has that capacity for their muscles to recruit those muscle fibers, which shows that they do have an advantage. They do have a net physical advantage. If you go into, I believe it should be the next, not the next slide, the one where it says the IRB bans trans women for competing with cis women.
Mm-hmm.
So I posed this debate to Godless Granny about a week before this came out. And it would seem that the IRB has come to the same conclusion as I have. They looked at the same studies that I have. And so far, there is a 20 to 30% increase of risk to the cisgendered women if they allow trans women to compete with them. That being said, the IRB does allow trans women who have not gone through male puberty to compete with cisgendered women. And if we go on to the next slide, there should be one with Fallon Fox and Tamika Brents.
Are they the two fighters?
It's not. The two UFC fighters, yes. So because no debates on trans women in sports would be complete without mentioning this MMA fight. I'm going to take a moment to pause and read about what Tamika Brents, the cis woman, had to say about fighting Fallon Fox. And if we look at the physiques of the two fighters, the one on the left, the one in the white bikini or white fighting suit, would be Fallon Fox. And we can see the advantages of testosterone. Fallon Fox is the MMA fighter that transitioned after male puberty and fought as a woman. And we can see Tamika Brents on the right, who's not had the advantages of male puberty. Just look at what she has to say about that. Now, I don't think I have much time left. And what I'd like to say is my primary concern is when it comes to the health and safety. Because I know how dangerous a sport like rugby can be, American football, Australian rules, and even Gaelic football, given the current evidence, I do not think it is a wise idea, a smart idea, to allow transgendered women, with the advantages that they have, to compete against cis women. I do think in non-contact sports, there are ways that we can do better and we can be more inclusive. That there's a way to, as I think God is going to said, to protect cisgendered women so that they're not, so they still have their representation. And at the very last slide, there's a short, I just want to show you a few short seconds of that video on the next slide, because this is what's at stake. This is not even entirely elite level rugby, and this is some of the damage that is being done to the human body with these tackles. So, Baldy, if you could please play a few seconds of the next slide. Okay, I think that should suffice for now. I think at this point, we've got an idea. I said to Baldy before this debate that I think there are many great areas that I would agree with Godless Granny in. And when it comes to anything that was in a non-sporting arena, when it comes to the academics, whatever else Godless Granny has said, I completely agree with her. Doesn't seem to be a necessary reason to exclude trans women from competing with cis women. If you want to have a female debate team, by all means, have cis women and trans women on that same debate team. That's fine. When it comes to sport, especially contact sports, given what's at stake, given the health and safety of the people playing that sport, you're creating an unnecessary additional risk to this. And for that reason, I do not think that trans women should be allowed to compete in contact sports with cisgendered women. And that's about it.
Okay, so I'll just remind you one more time that I've put a link in the chat, and there it is again, so you can go and post some questions to Godless Granny and Dave about the opening statement. We'll just get straight into the debate. Thank you both for preparing such a good, strong opening argument, because it's nice to see people coming on and, you know, really giving each other something to talk about. So thank you very much for that. Godless Granny, I will go over to you and, you know, just start the debate however, start with whatever point you want. I'm sure it'll be nice and civil and we can just hear the back and forth, but off you go.
Okay, so Dave, you would say that competition between trans women and cis women is okay everywhere except in contact sports? It's only contact sports that you would disallow?
Yes, in contact sports, I would disallow. I think we need to be careful when it comes to events such as powerlifting, sprinting, marathons. We need to be a bit more careful about that, but there's less risk to the cisgendered woman's body.
Okay, so your primary concern is health and safety.
It's health and safety. Because I think,
Okay.
did you see the few clips of rugby?
I did. I did. I did want to go to Fallon Fox, though, the story of Fallon Fox. Are you aware
Yes,
that,
please, let's do that.
in MMA wrestling, when a person starts out, when they are an unknown, the matches that they have in the beginning are often very unequal matches because the people setting up the fights don't know how these fighters are going to be because they are unknowns, correct?
With one caveat. When it
Okay.
comes to MMA, they have weight categories for particular reasons.
Yes. Yes.
Very briefly, New Zealand rugby has an under 85 kilogram category because someone like me, who's well over 110 kilos, smashing into someone who's, let's say, 82, there's a lot of damage there. And
Okay.
also when it comes to those early fights, they are very inexperienced. You have someone who might be very experienced and someone who's going up against someone who knows nothing.
Okay.
Who
But
saw
in
the
the
Karate
case-
Kid and thinks he can be the new Johnny Lawrence.
Okay. In the case of Fallon Fox, she did win her first 3 rounds as she was an unknown and she was up against people that were not at her level of fighting. But once she reached an opponent that was her level of fighting, she got her ass handed to her. She lost to a cis woman and she lost badly. She lost so badly that she dropped out of the sport.
Okay, and your point with that being?
My point with that being that, because there is the weight category, the weight limit in MMA, she really didn't have any advantage. As soon as she reached someone that was at her level of skill, she was defeated. That she didn't have an advantage of being trans.
So if we go back to the very early days of the UFC, it was, I think, Hoist Gracie who beat Ken Shamrock and a few other people who were far outside of his weight category, were much heavier than what he was. Weight isn't the only defining characteristic. Skill does play a part.
Mm-hmm.
When people have watched her early fights, Fallon's early fights, it was clear that she was not winning because she was more skilled than the cis woman. It was because of the advantages of male puberty.
I disagree with you there, but that's okay. Would you agree that
Why do you agree with that? Yeah, I think that's
because as soon as she got to a higher level skilled competitor, she lost. She started losing to the cis women as soon as she got to more skilled competitors.
The argument's never been if the trans women are going to take all the gold and take all the accolades and all the awards. That should never be the defining argument. Because even when it came to the 2 track athletes that I think he took maybe even 2nd and 3rd, and there was that cis woman that wanted to sue them because she lost out. I think you might be aware of the case I'm referring to.
Are you talking about the high school girls in Connecticut?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
Probably. The issue isn't if they're going to take, same with Oscar Pistorius, the issue was never, are they going to take the gold or the silver or the bronze? The issue is, are they competing at the same level? Have the advantages of male puberty been sufficiently mitigated? And so far, and I will agree with you that there's insufficient evidence, but what little there is shows that it has not been sufficiently mitigated, that trans women are still at a net advantage from male puberty.
Would you agree that if a woman, transitions before puberty, that she has no advantage?
I would agree with that, and that is why the IRB, as I mentioned, has allowed trans women who have transitioned before puberty, they can compete along cisgender women.
Okay, so there's no reason to ban transgender women from sports entirely. You just want to ban transgender women who sorry, the word's falling out of my head, transition after puberty, and only in contact sports, and only at the elite level.
Primarily at the elite level. I do agree that when it comes to playing social game with friends, sure, why not? Go for it. If you can
Okay.
have a company, baseball team, softball team, whatever team, sure. As long
Okay.
as they're not going to be running over anyone and, let's say, abusing their advantages. I think that if someone, do you know who Hannah Mounsey is?
No.
So she's an Australian transgender athlete who played handball
The
and
volleyball
Australian
player?
rules football. No, not volleyball,
No.
handball.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Handball and Aussie rules. So if she was going to, let's say, abuse her size, then I'd have an issue with it if she was playing for the company. Just like I think if I had to take up coaching rugby as a part-time job, and I started playing full contact with kids who are, let's say, between 12 to 15, and I abused my size, I think many people would say, like, dude, you gotta check yourself.
I would agree with you there. The point where I would disagree with you is that the solution is to ban them from the sport. I do agree with you that, we've got more work to do to try to get to a net zero level, but I don't agree that banning them from the sport until we can get there is the correct solution.
Then what is your proposed solution? Because, and I think we should draw the distinction between contact sports and non-contact sports. I think there should be a distinction in there.
I'm not sure that there should be, but I'm not certain. I haven't really explored that topic. I see your point on the rugby, but on the other hand, rugby is a very violent sport. When women play it, it's still a violent sport. Lacrosse is also a very violent sport. In American football, obviously, is a very violent sport, but there are very few women that play American football. We don't even have any American, well, I suppose there are probably some American women teams, but there aren't any professional American women football teams. So I haven't really looked into this a whole lot. Here's my problem.
Okay.
Is that when you start trying to define, okay, you're allowed here and you're not allowed here, I think we do more harm than we do by allowing them there and saying, okay, look, there's some situations where there could be issues. We need to work on those issues. I just see that as being the greater harm.
When you say harm, what type of harm are you referring to?
Okay. I'm referring to the harm that is done to trans people by telling them you are permitted in these spaces and you are banned from these spaces. The social, the psychological, the emotional harm that does, I think, is greater than the physical harm that someone is going to face from being competing with someone that's bigger than they are, more muscle than they are, larger bones than they are, etc.
With all due respect, how certain are you of that?
I'm sorry, what?
With all due respect, how certain are you of that?
I'm fairly certain, because the injuries that you face in sport are usually not major injuries. The psychological injury from being banned from some areas are permanent. You carry that with you for life.
So, if you ask any rugby player, and I'm not going to be unique in this, if you ask any rugby player about the injuries they've sustained, they will range. On my side, I've had slip discs in my neck. I had my shoulder dislocated twice. I've had a few very nasty blows to my back and my spine. I've had problems with my hamstring and my knee. I'm feeling the effects of those. I might need surgery for my shoulder to be able to go back and play properly, because so far it's an unpleasant feeling. I have lost a significant amount of mobility in my right shoulder because of those injuries. A trans person, after having, actually I wrote the names down because would speak directly to what you're talking about. Mary Gregory, yes, specifically Mary Gregory, that case was handled horribly. She is able to receive, if she wishes, psychological and psychiatric help for what they did to her, which I thought was terrible. She could potentially get over that, and she could understand, and people who are playing sports at these levels, they should be able to understand the risks that they're putting their bodies at and other people's bodies at. And I don't think that it should be feelings over. I think you said it, or maybe I paraphrased it towards the end. We talk about feelings, and we've been talking now as feelings over fairness.
I think it goes to more than just feelings, though. The idea that your class of people are banned entirely from being here because we don't think you can play fair. I think that is far more harmful than what. Okay, first of all, when it comes to rugby, it's a dangerous sport to start with. So we're not talking about a difference between, okay, if we keep trans women out, then rugby is safe for women, because it's not. Women are going to face injury, and if they play rugby, whether trans women are playing or not. So we're talking a difference of degree, not a difference of these women are not safe versus safe. And so I think. Go ahead.
No, you wanted to finish something, go for it.
Okay. The part of the problem is that we can't measure that degree. To what degree are women who play rugby in more danger because they play with a trans woman as opposed to only playing with other cis women? That's something we really can't measure.
Hang on. There is a minimum of 20 to 30% increase in injury risk factors when typical male-bodied and female-bodied players are involved in tackles, even when trans women suppress their testosterone in line with International Olympic Committee rules. That is the finding to the IRB, and that is why they banned trans women from competing with cis women.
In rugby?
And in rugby. This was in rugby at international levels. And what they did say, though, was that each union may create their own rules and their own guidelines, but when it comes to international games and the Olympics, this is the rules as they stand, that trans women cannot compete. So I think it was roughly a week after the IRB said that trans women cannot compete with cis women, the Baldy helped out with this Rugby Football Union. That's your guys in England, right?
I'm not
Rugby
in
Football
England.
Union is... No, but I think that's because Baldy is.
I'm in.
I think that is their governing body for rugby that takes care of all the rugby issues in England. They have said that they will allow trans women to compete with cis women in domestic competitions at all levels. So very soon it might be that we see the certain injuries increase. It might very well be that we will see these a lot more injuries coming through. The unfortunate thing when it comes to contact sports, and this goes for any contact sport, not just rugby, is that the effects are truly felt well after the person has retired. That once they've taken stock of their career and said, okay, I've come to that level and now I'm going to retire, it's when they get to their mid to late 40s, early 50s that they say that they can feel in their body that it's been wrecked. Look at Muhammad Ali.
Right. Yeah, it's exactly what I was thinking of as you were saying that. But all of these injuries all occur regardless of trans people being there or not being there. Muhammad Ali was obviously never up against a trans boxer, and I realize that the point you're trying to make is that men inflict these injuries on other men, and if we allow trans women to compete, some of them have some aspects of male bodies, and therefore we bring that into a women's sport. Okay, and we probably do need to handicap them in some way. In what way, I don't know. Maybe what we need to do is say that, for weight categories, that trans women have to compete in one higher weight category than cis women.
I could meet you
But
there.
yeah.
Meet you there somewhere in. Again, as I said to you, the reason why I showed my hand to you when we spoke in private on Twitter, the reason I showed my hand, it's not about excluding them, and I said in my opening, it's about I'm aware of how much value sport adds to a person's life.
Mhm.
I'm also aware that various people need, as you said inspiration, motivation, transcendence. I didn't catch everything that you said. And I agree with that. So I do think there are ways that we can do this better.
Mhm.
So I'd like to come meet you somewhere in the middle, somewhere between the
I think
two
I think we
spots.
can meet somewhere in the middle, because I think I would agree that, there are some sports that we might need to, like rugby. I don't know much about rugby, so I really don't want to say a whole lot about rugby, but that might be a sport where we might need to say, hey, we need to do some more work to figure out how to make this fair for everyone. And I do agree that we do need to do some more work to bring them to a net zero level. And I do agree that it is the trans women who have the burden of proof to show that they have a net zero advantage. But once you've achieved that net zero advantage, then there's no reason to bar them from the sport.
Agreed. So that's where I think we can agree that once that those advantages have been mitigated, by all means, let them have their fun. By all means, but until that point comes, especially in contact sports, we're going to need to say that the person's health and safety should be the number one priority. And when it comes to the fairness, there's an issue of fairness. Some of the studies that I've shown you, I can agree with you that someone who's gone through hormone replacement therapy, HRT, that they're not competing. If they hadn't taken that, they would be able to run faster. They would be able to lift more weight. That was true for Mary Gregory when she talked about a transition, about what she was, pardon, after what she was able to lift prior to transitioning and post. So there's clearly some advantage. They're clearly losing some of those advantages. Right now, I don't think, as you said, they've met the burden of proof that those advantages have been mitigated.
What about intersex athletes?
It's a very good question. I think you might be referring to Caster Semenya.
I had her in mind, but yeah, she's not. Yeah, she's the only one I know of that's famous, but she's certainly not alone.
Somehow it's always the South Africans making trouble. Which is where I'm from originally, which is why I enjoy giving a few stats at rugby. I'm not entirely certain. I do think that's a discussion worth having. I think there's also people, as a form of it's what androgen insensitive, I forget what it's actually called, where their entire biology and makeup is male. However, I think that they don't produce androgen, the male sex hormones, so they look. If you like to look at them physically without, with their clothes on, they would appear to be female. So, however, no, and they have not gone through male puberty. So the question is, where do they compete? I think these are very worthwhile questions to be asked. And if it can be shown that they don't have a net advantage over cis women, sure. In the case when it came to Ask for Stories, I want to read to you what they said. I read the last sentence, I think it was. The panel, it was that each case needs to be considered on its own merits. It doesn't give a blanket rule to anyone else. And as I said in my opening, it does create an additional burden, and just must be viewed as another challenge of 21st century life.
Yeah, no matter what we do, we're gonna run into something. I mean, 100 years ago, we would have been having this debate about whether or not black athletes should be able to compete with white athletes. And 50 years from now, it's going to be a different category.
We'll see what happens in 50 years. And I don't think we can
I
quite
won't be
see what
here.
the is. Medicine's come a long way.
I'm
Medicine has come a long
59. I know I don't look it, but I'm 59.
Medicine's come a fairly long way. Um, I'm not entirely certain I'll be here in another 50 years. I don't know what's going to happen when I can't play rugby anymore. But that being aside, um, when it comes to issues of who should be allowed to compete and in what categories, we do need to look, especially now where we have better technology, to see what's going on inside a person's body and their physiological changes and advantages of male puberty, especially in most of these athletic events that demand explosive power. Right now, decisions should be based on what the evidence is, what the science is saying, not how someone feels, and not what seems superficially to be the right decision.
Yeah, I don't entirely disagree with you. I think we do need to make rules based on what the science is, but on the other hand, I also agree that it has to be on a case by case basis. But as far as how the feelings go, let me share a little bit of my own story. I used to be a triathlete. And one of the reasons I chose triathlon as my sport is because I'm terrible at sports. And it took me a long time to figure out why. And it is physical because I had a severe scoliosis. And when I competed in a full triathlon in 2012, I knew that that would be my last competition because I was very quickly losing the ability to walk. I did the run for that with a cane. I walked with a cane. Um, and 6 months after it, I had scoliosis surgery, and now I can only swim a quarter of a mile, whereas swimming 2 miles was no challenge for me before surgery. But I can walk again. Is the trade off. But the thing that really hurt me and what I was shocked to discover is I can't ride my bike anymore. I altered my bike to be able to fit my new physiology because my spine is now completely immobile. And so I had to raise the handlebars so I could sit upright on it. But it is so disgusting to me to only be able to ride for 10 miles and I'm in pain. And some people look at that and say, well, 10-mile bike ride, that's great. I said, not when a century used to be my Saturday workout. 10 in 1 hour, and I'm in so much pain, I need to go put the bike away. And it is so difficult emotionally that I won't even ride anymore. And so I can kind of relate to what some of these athletes are saying, that when they try to compete in sports and people are ridiculing because of the way their body looks, ridiculing them because they're larger or because they have more muscle, and you just want to walk away from the whole thing and say, forget it, it's just too hard.
There's a few things I do agree with you on, especially the psychological aspect. Anyone knows that after any sort of injury, what you're able to do afterwards, you just have to go through a process of recovery before you can get back to anywhere you were. And it's mentally very, very challenging and demanding. And any person who's been taking part in sports or academia, it doesn't really matter where it is, when they get to the place where they can no longer compete at their best, when they see those times slipping away from them, those are very difficult moments. And then it's not something maybe I can marginally empathize with when it comes to someone who's being told, you may not play rugby or American football because of X, Y, and Z. I don't think it's an easy thing to say to them. I don't think it should be taken lightly. But they're also going to have to acknowledge and say, this is what the science is saying, and they have a certain advantage. that would be an unfair advantage. It's not that, and there should be a distinction, a definite moral distinction. No one's calling them cheats. I don't think it's fair to label them outright as cheats.
Yeah.
But they do need to, the trans athletes do need to, I think, take have some level of awareness that male puberty has given them an enormous advantage that a cis woman just will not have. Anyway, I think I have the numbers around. The typical female has between 0.3 to 2.4 nanomoles of testosterone.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Testosterone. And men have between 10.4 to 41.6.
Mm-hmm.
That's their range. And IAAF says that as long as trans women, amongst other things, as long as they have, I think it's 5 nanomoles of testosterone per liter of blood, then they may compete. That's still about twice as much testosterone as
an average woman.
So let's maybe say bump it up to maybe a bit unscientific, bump it up to maybe 3.5 to 4 nanomoles per liter for the elite woman.
Mm-hmm.
They still have more testosterone, which isn't, the testosterone isn't necessarily the be all end all.
Right, because some women can't. Yeah, some people can't process it.
Can I just put in for 10 seconds? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, listen, this is brilliant. Like, I'm sat back, I'm chilled. I even dialed in a beer from downstairs because I don't feel that I've got any difficult moderating to do. Like, the way you guys are tackling this, which is quite a sensitive subject as well, is brilliant. So thank you both so much for that. But I just also, because I'm a bit conscious that with me being on my own and useless, I don't want to miss any super chats that are being read out, and they may provide things that you can then go on and talk about, because obviously they're all related to the debate. So I'm just going to read a few of them out, and then if you want to pick up on any of them, feel free. First one's from J.O. Warren. Thank you, J.O. Warren. And by the way, I'm going to shield this out, but next Saturday, Halloween, J.O. Warren is going to be my co-host on the Conspiracy Catz channel, where we're going to be doing a bit of a Halloween stream. So watch out for that, me and J.O. Warren. So thank you very much for that. He says, Murray Gregory, a trans female powerlifter, set 9 world records in one day competing in the women's brackets. J.O. Warren again says, you cannot twist...
Hang on.
Oh, sorry, mate, go on.
Yeah, I do want to say something, because I did bring her up. I don't know if he brought up Mary, because I brought up Mary.
Possibly, it was a while ago.
They stripped her of those records.
Did they? Right. Well,
yes.
Maybe when you could tell us more about why that was, because I'm not familiar with that story at all. Jay Warren again, and thank you very much. You cannot twist a fairness and sports safety issue into a social issue. Vicious sports injuries trump hurt feelings. Luke Mitchell, thank you very much, Luke. There are so many variables in the biology of people and what makes them good at specific sports. There is no yes or no answer to this, in my opinion. And Christopher Shapley, thank you very much. Shout out to J.O. Warren, side chat MVP tonight. I don't know what MVP means, but yeah, J.O. Warren is always... oh, what, sorry?
Most valuable player.
Oh, most valuable player. Yeah, I agree. He's always doing a great job in the side chat. So I don't know if any of those things will prompt any more discussion, but I didn't want to not read them out, because if Creaky's not here, I tend to mess up. So at least I know I've caught up with them. Sorry, guys. Back to you.
Yeah. I think some of them have been for you. I've been directed more for you, Kelly.
The only one that I really thought was an issue was the one about injuries versus feelings. And, yes, injuries can be permanent. I do recognize that. But the inability to be included is more than just feelings. Ask anyone that has faced exclusion, particularly talk to Black people in America, that even 50 years ago, were not permitted at white public libraries. We're not permitted in the public pools. We're not, they were not permitted in white spaces. And while gender, and race are completely different things, and I recognize that there are major differences here. I don't want to equate them. When you understand what happens when they are excluded, that's what I'm talking about with feelings, not just my feelings are hurt because I can't come here. It's more of I'm not welcome. And that's, having an entire people group that's entirely excluded, that's more than just I had my feelings hurt.
May I weigh in on that for a brief moment? I just think this is where we need to be very careful about the language that we use. On the one hand, I don't think that malicious intent should be automatically assumed, but I do think when it comes to the variety of topics, some level of nuance and understanding needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way to address these issues. I don't. This is very, very off topic, but I don't think that. I think trans people commit suicide at a rate of 40%. Can you help me with that statistic?
I'm sorry. Did you say suicide?
Suicide, yes. The trans people are 40% more likely to commit suicide. Is that something that I've heard? Can you confirm that?
I don't have the percentage, but they definitely are far more likely to, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that they are not accepted in society.
I'm going to say, so I'm not going to say that's the only factor why that number would be so high.
Correct.
I do think it is a factor, and I think that
Correct.
there are a variety of other issues that they need to deal with, which involves them, that they do need to seek help for. And that's more what I have to say on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's so far we've had a very, very nice discussion.
I think we're actually pretty close to agreement as well. Our positions are not that far off.
Not that far off. I think where we are mainly disagreeing does come down to the inclusion. It comes down to the psychological effects of telling the trans woman that they're banned from competing.
Mm-hmm.
I do acknowledge that that is a major issue for them. I'm not blind to that. I'm not deaf to those concerns. But I do think that trans women are going to have to also realize and be accommodating of what the science is showing.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be some sort of give and take.
We need to find some way to handicap them. We need to find some way to level the playing field by giving them some kind of handicap. And, there's some sports that lend themselves well to handicap, but rugby is definitely not one of them.
So it may be that for the time being, until then, there might be some drugs and medication in the future that
Mm-hmm.
would lower bone density,
Mm-hmm.
that would put trans women at an equal risk.
I would be really worried about doing that, though, because when you start messing with a woman's bone density, then you make her more susceptible to fracture.
So when I talk about lowering bone density, I'm not talking about cis women, I'm talking specifically about trans women.
Trans women, I realize that.
Okay. So if we could make their bones as dense as, or maybe just a little bit more dense, which is, again, not entirely scientific to say a little bit more dense, but I think people get the gist of what I'm saying.
I think you mean less dense.
Because when it comes... I'm saying that the trans women, if their density is just a little bit more dense than a cis woman.
Oh, okay. I thought I was thinking you meant that you want to make them less dense like a cis woman.
Yeah, make them less dense to bring them closer to cis woman.
Right.
Because especially when it comes to the contact sports, and it comes to the force that's felt after a punch, if it's not as dense, more energy and force is transferred with that punch, with that tackle, as opposed to something that is less dense. think of being hit with a sledgehammer that is made something from
I understand
rubber
what you're
versus
saying.
metal.
I just
But
would be.
until the
I
point
understand.
comes where, please just finish. So until the point comes where we can mitigate those advantages, I do think that trans women are going to have to show a bit of understanding and, let's say, work with us, work with the system.
I also think that sports, people who are involved in making rules for sports need to look at, is this really a safety issue? And if it's not, then let's err on the side of inclusion. And if it is a safety issue, okay, let's, you come to us and you find us a way that you can be included and you can still be, make sure that all the other competitors are safe, and then we'll include you.
I think to that I could agree on that. I think it does become very, very difficult, and these are not easy subjects to talk about. We do need to. I don't know how much more I have left to say on this. Otherwise, I think I'd just be starting to talk in circles.
I was just going to chip in on that. If you're saying we're now, two things are going on. One, I'm having a nightmare behind the scenes that the I think we're still streaming, but the YouTube thingamajig streamy thing has all gone blank, so I don't actually know what's going on. But I think we're still streaming. I can see the chat, so hopefully the chat can let me know we're still streaming. But I was going to say we've got quite a few questions in the community poll, and I'll link that out again here, if just one more time. So if anybody wants a chance to ask some more questions, please do. And if we say maybe like 5 or 6 minutes maybe, and then we'll go over to the questions, and that might prompt something, and we'll see it out with the questions. How's that sound?
Okay.
And you've both been great. And there was one more super chat from J.O. Warren, which I want to read out, but it's disappeared from the whole live streaming thing has gone. So J.O. Warren, I'm sorry, if you tag me in the live chat, then I'll read it out if you tell me what you said. But everything's gone from my end. I haven't got a clue I don't even know I'm going to stop the stream. So I'll worry about that for the next 6 minutes, and then we'll go and do some questions. But you guys, maybe a closing statement or whatever you want to do for the next 6 minutes. Crack on.
I think there was, maybe one thing that Kelly had said that I would like to touch on. That's, I guess, tangentially connected. About when it comes to not winning or lose, it's how you play or playing the game, which I'd say is rubbish, because it is always so much better to win. It's very nice to compete. It's very nice to have that competition and be in the finals, but only one team can win. Only one team can lift the gold cup. Isn't that right, Baldy?
Oh, sorry, I was trying to sort the technical problems out. Say that one more time, mate.
That was me taking a dig at England for losing twice in the finals against South Africa.
So I declare Godless Granny the winner of this debate, right? Right now. Yeah, no, that still hurts, mate. That still hurts, but crack on.
It is. So it's the many things they're making to the Olympics is fantastic, but I think it is also fair to say that winning gold at the Olympics is so much better and feels so much more rewarding than getting there.
And the point where I would disagree with you is that if you are not even permitted to get to the starting line, that is far worse. I mentioned that I'm a triathlete and I'm a lousy athlete because I have such severe problems with my bones. And in almost every race I've ever been in, I finish last. But I've always told people dead last finish is better than did not finish. And did not finish is better than did not start. And all I'm saying is that give trans women a chance to start.
Under what conditions? Because this is where it becomes very, very contentious, and we'll be going back to where we're going to disagree. Because if they're starting 50 meters ahead in a 100-meter race, that's not much of a competition. It becomes very, very dangerous. So I'd say that they can
Not
start.
in a running race.
Not in a running race. What do you mean not in a running race? They can.
It's not
they have the
dangerous to be.
guidelines
It's
fly.
not dangerous to be ahead
Oh,
in a
yeah.
running race. You're not posing any danger to the other runners by being ahead.
Physically, no. No. But if we're talking about advantages, having certain advantages of male puberty, I do think that becomes very. That is an obstacle that they do need to overcome. That is the major obstacle that they do need to overcome. I agree.
Guys,
That is an obstacle that needs to be overcome. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there. Well, I did, but not. I thought you'd finished. Should we maybe have like a 2, 3, 4, however long you need, minute, like closing argument each, and then we'll go to the questions in the chat because we've got about 8, but I think 2 or 3 minutes a question. That's going to tag another half hour onto the show. So, do you fancy going to like a closing statement each? Are we happy with that?
I'm good with just going straight to questions because I've really said everything I want to say.
Yeah, sure. Right, can I say something to the chat then? I'm
Sorry, Dave.
having real problems here seeing anything in the analytics or whatever, and I genuinely mean it when I say I don't even know how I'm going to end the stream. It's all gone blank, so please do not send any more super chats from this time because I will not see it when I go over to here, and I don't want to see one. I don't want someone to send one and then me to not see it. Although I have just seen one pop up in the chat there. J.O. Warren, you cannot levy handicaps in favour of social issues. There are disturbing historical parallels there. Thank you, J.O. Warren. Can that please be the last one? Because I have to go to a different page and I won't be able to see the chat. But thank you. Right, questions. GG, Dave.
I think
I'm not very. I told you I was going to get. Sorry, mate.
I think that question was for Godless to respond to.
Oh, right, yeah, we'll have that as the first question. I'm not
Okay.
So you cannot levy handicaps in favour of social issues. There are disturbing historical parallels there. What do you think, Godless?
Well, actually, to be honest, I actually thought it was for Dave, but that's fine. I don't mind responding to that because, you're right. You can't have handicaps in favor of social issues, and there are a lot of social issues involved here, which is why I think we need to err on the side of inclusion rather than exclusion.
Dave, what do you think about that?
This is where I've disagreed. This is where I've disagreed, where I do acknowledge that there are social issues over here, but I think we might have to go back to that distinction between contact and non-contact, where in certain sports you can't levy that handicap, and I don't think J.L. Warren is entirely getting the gist of what's going on, because we're not necessarily talking about a social issue, we're talking about an athletic issue. This isn't about should trans women intermingle in the workplace. I think that should be an obvious yes. We're talking about should trans women compete with cis women in athletic events. That's what we've been discussing for most of the evening. It's not a social issue.
And I think you
Well, at
just
least for
proved
me.
my point.
Okay, which your point would be?
Going back to my original statement that the whole framing of the issue, there was the assumption that we were talking about sports when the category itself didn't even include that. And because there are such strong social aspects to this, that's only assumed into it when really sports is only a small part of the issue of competition in general.
And I will fully take that on me for not including that word sports. I should have included the word sports when I gave you that second option. I should have included the word sports. For me, I thought it was and I assumed, which I should not have done, that it would have been relegated to sports. Because there are social issues which we do need to address, and which one of those issues I think I would very much be on your side on that. However, when it comes to this particular issue on sport, this is where I would cross the aisle, so to speak.
Right, so let's get to the community page. Excuse me. So we've got about 8 or 9, maybe 10 questions to get through here. So maybe, spend a minute and a half, 2 minutes on each. The first one's from Matthew Cook, who says, how can a trans woman, and I know you've touched on this, but how can a trans woman compete in MMA? A heavyweight versus John Jones isn't going to end well. What do we think about that?
What? No, I think that one's for Granny, I think, but I think that's a malformed question.
Was the question, how can a trans woman compete with men?
Yes, yeah. In MMA.
But she shouldn't. She shouldn't. She should be competing with women. And like I said, the easy handicap in MMA is just move her to a higher weight class.
I think that is the way that is worded is a trans woman compete. Okay, yeah.
Trans man.
I think they've got that the wrong way around. Yeah, that like when we were off air and I was asking to get the terminology right, I think he's done the same as me. So I think what he means is how can a trans man compete in MMA? So, for example, a heavyweight trans man against John Jones.
Okay.
Yeah. John Jones is a light heavyweight. Don't get it twisted. John Jones is a light heavyweight, not a heavyweight. Thank you very much. You can stay down there.
So, I know you touched on that.
Granny, would you like to take that one?
I don't know who these people are because I don't follow MMA at all. I only know the case of Fallon Fox because it's in the transgender area.
Think Mike Tyson in boxing. Think John Jones. Think Mike Tyson. Think along those lines.
But if a trans man chooses to compete in MMA or boxing or whatever, I think it's on the trans man to know what he's what he's getting into, what risks he is incurring, and if we need to allow trans men to compete in a lower category because you're compensating for their lower bone density, there's no reason why we couldn't allow for them to have a handicap in their favor.
Dave, what do you think?
Well, the issue is very much reversed because they're starting at a disadvantage. Trans men are starting at the disadvantage of having gone through female puberty, and I say that purely in the context of athletic performance. Which means that by all means, let them go up against John Jones, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield. Let them have at it because they've started at a disadvantage.
I don't think
which
there's
is
really
why we've been talking about trans men.
Right. I don't think there's really an issue there for trans men because, the difference for trans women is that if a trans woman is competing, her competitor will not necessarily have chosen to accept the risk of having an opponent who might be, physically advantaged over them. But a trans man that's going into MMA or any other kind of physical competition, he's going in knowing what disadvantages he has.
Brilliant, thank you. Next one from Simon Armitage. Should trans people be allowed to compete in esports? Which is basically computer games. So I think that's a joke, that one. The answer is yes. Luke Mitchell, who was on, he's debated on this channel. He came on as a guest on Wednesday night. Loved to have him back on. He was brilliant. So Luke Mitchell, Gigi made a nice case, but misses a bit. When talking about sport as just for fun, she misses the point of competitive sport. So this is a question to you, Godless Granny. Do you see a need for different rules for transgender Do you see a need for different rules for transgender participation in competition versus just participation at school in general for fun, for health? So in competitive sports, should they be changing the rules, basically?
Okay. There's so many different areas here. You mentioned school. If you're talking about in high school, I think the trans women have got to be included, because that is probably the place more than anywhere else that, their exclusion is causing mental health issues and is causing, problems of feeling not included with the rest of the girls. And what does somebody lose by competing with a trans woman in high school sports? I don't think they lose anything. Yeah, maybe they didn't win. So what? If you're looking at scholarship opportunities, name a single trans woman that has a sports scholarship. When I wrote my opening statement, it was originally 15 minutes long, and I had to cut a lot of it out to get it down to the time limit. And one of the paragraphs was on this, was that when I was researching this, I looked for any trans woman who has received a sports scholarship. I couldn't find a single one. And when, some people make the complaint that, cis women are losing out on scholarship opportunities. No, they're not. When scouts come out and are looking at athletes, they're looking at habits, they're looking at abilities, they're looking at what they're doing. They're not looking at how many races did you win. So if you are a high level athlete and you happen to be, having lost a couple races, that's not going to affect your ability to be offered a scholarship or an opportunity in college. And even the girls in Connecticut, which are, the hot topic, Yearwood doesn't win all of her races. She lost several of her races and didn't even qualify in one of the final competitions.
Dave, you got anything you want to add to that one?
No, not in particular. I think God has covered it fairly well.
So Captain Quinn has asked a question of all three of us, actually. He says, so if they are the same build, same height and weight, what do you say about intergender sports? Please both and Catz put pro sports and negative. Put pro sport. I think it means, can we all just comment on that? If we've got men and women, same size, same build, same strength, intergender sports, what do you think?
I'll go first. I don't have a problem with it. Anyone that wants to compete, obviously there's no reason why they can't compete intergender if that's what they want. The only thing is that sometimes women want to have their own space and they want to have their own sports because they do have physical disadvantages.
Dave?
Yep, pretty much. I think if they'd been watching from the beginning, I had the records up for bench pressing. So I can get it in front of me now. Let's see. I think at the 84 kilogram plus category, the record was 151.5 kilos. This was the female category. In the male category, the guy weighed 59 kilos. And he lifted 171 kilos. He was able to bench press 171.
59 kilos? My word.
58.48. So it's up to, his actual weight was 58.48. And the woman who was able to lift 151 kilos, 151.5, weighs 132.7 kilos. So there's a reason why there's a gender segregation in a variety of different sports. And that would be one of them, as Godless said, that those who go through male puberty have certain advantages. But there are quite a few sports, equestrian and sailing, to name two of them, where they do have intergender competitions, and also they'll have male and females on the same team, especially in sailing. Where else is it? Even in tennis, I think under certain rules, they have mixed doubles. So it's a thing already.
Yeah, and snooker and darts as well, big things. I think there was Sharon Horrocks, was she called? Or was she called something Shorrock? I can't remember, but anyone from the UK who follows darts will know what I'm talking about. And she made some waves. She beat a couple of quite high-level male players. And I just think it depends on the sport, doesn't it? depends on the sport and whether advantages are conveyed or not. I think things that boil down to skill, like your snooker, your pool, your darts, etc., I don't see a need for segregation. But this is your debate, not mine, so I'll shut up now. Luke Mitchell, again, says, question for Dave. Much of your argument has been about a person's ability to compete without injury. Do you agree that teams or managers will choose players based on ability, so sex at birth is irrelevant? So in other words, if they're good enough, they're good enough.
That's never been my. I don't think that's ever been my argument. It's not. It's because that there's that risk to injury that I've been making my argument. My whole argument has been based on the risk of injury. So I don't really know how. So I have no idea what is he actually asking.
I think what he's basically saying is if. Oh, I'm going to paraphrase this, and I apologise, Luke, if I'm paraphrasing your question wrong. But is the kind of old saying, if you're good enough, you're good enough? Does that fit here? So, for example, if you're a manager or a coach, and you have a whole squad to select from or people to choose, and if some of them are trans athletes, if they are good enough, you will pick them. If they're not good enough, you will not pick them. I think he's saying, what do you think of that argument?
If I'm picking a team to play in a World Cup final, I am going to pick the people who would make the best players. Well, the evidence shows that there's a good reason we segregate the sports via genders. There's a reason why I haven't gone into the Australian women's team losing to under 15, Australian female soccer team having lost to the under 15 soccer side. So I really don't understand why he's trying to ask that question. Like, there's certain things that are just seem to be self-evidently true. It's not to say that there are definitely many female rugby players who would cream me. I grant and accept that. And I wouldn't pick me for a women's rugby team because I would get my ass handed to me. But on the international level, there's a reason why we separate them.
Okay. Next one from Call of the Void. And I think we have handled this one actually, but should cis men and women be allowed to compete in each other's sports as they are currently excluded from each other's? But I think we answered that when we talked about intergender sports, didn't we? Mm-hmm. Dorian B Gaming has corrected me. It was Fallon Sherrock, not Sharrock. She was the queen of the palace, a darts player. So thank you for that, Dorian B Gaming. Zerg Jerk says, if trans people are allowed in physical sports, should then also cybernetic implants and limbs in the future be allowed? Or should they be a different category then?
That's a good question. We said earlier that 50 years from now we'll be debating a different category. I think he's come up with it. I think that's going to be the one.
Yeah. Currently, according to the IAAF, that person would be excluded from competing in the regular Olympics. They'll have to probably compete in the Paralympics, depending on why they have whatever it is they have. If they have a robotic arm or leg.
I can see a day coming pretty soon where, for example, if it's not already there now because I'm not that well brushed up on it, but for example, where the sprinters in the Paralympics run faster times than the people in the normal Olympics because of the advancement. We talked about Oster Pistorius before and the advantages he may or may not have gained, and technology is going to move fast. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised 10 years, 15 years from now, the fastest sprinters on the planet are technologically aided para sprinters, if that makes sense. Okay, so Captain Quinn says, it doesn't matter. Do you think the bone density and muscle mass instantly disappeared? I think that's a reference to maybe post-puberty transitions. So what do we think? Do we think bone density and muscle mass, how much of that do we think is lost?
It takes about a year on HRT to bring the testosterone levels down. And it takes, from what I have read in the studies, the same with the muscle mass as well.
Muscle
what about
mass
bone density?
Does not decrease. The studies show that the bone density does not decrease and the skeletal structure is well preserved. That's because when a person goes through puberty, that's when the bone plates fuse. So when you're 3 or 4 years old, you have more bones than you do when you are an adult, because bones are fused. So the HRT does nothing to change the skeletal structure.
That's why, some argue that trans women in sports do have some disadvantage because they've got less muscle mass trying to move larger bones. And it does prove as a disadvantage in some sports, in some, depending on whether it's a sport that requires speed or agility or endurance.
So the thing is,
sorry,
it's not that when it comes to losing the muscle mass, which they definitely do. Some study that I cited by Dr. Devine, and full disclosure, the experiments that had been running were on mice, but it's because the way their muscles operate are very similar to humans. So I can see if I can get the actual quote. If you exercise or take anabolic steroids, you get more nuclei and you get bigger muscles. If you take away the steroids, you use the muscle mass, but the nuclei remain inside the muscle fibers. They are like temporary closed factories ready to start producing protein again when you start exercising again. This means that the trans woman, once they start training again, they don't lose all of the muscle mass. They still retain some of the strength. Someone could have the size of the muscle doesn't necessarily indicate how strong that person is. You'll find, especially if you go back to the bench press records, where are they? Here we go. So it was, where is it? For the men, I think the best ratio was someone who weighed 72.4 kilos who was able to bench just over 210 kilos. He has less muscle than the guy who was able to lift 291. Just because of the way he was able to train, he's able to lift more weight in the bench press, which I realize I've bungled that horribly. But the point still stands that the size of the muscle does not necessarily indicate how strong the person is.
And this brings us to now. This is kind of a side point. It doesn't go directly to the topic, which is why I didn't bring it up earlier. Is a lot of trans women athletes will end up abandoning the sport because of the muscle development. They go on HRT and they start getting a body that looks more feminine, and they feel more feminine, and they feel more in line with their bodies. And then when they go back into athletics and they start building that muscle back up and they start looking less feminine, many of them will abandon sports for that reason, because they're willing to give up sports in order to have the more feminine looking body.
Why? And again, this might be off topic. I understand if you don't want to answer this, but why do you think that would be?
Why do I think they would leave the sport for the feminine body?
Yes.
Because it gives them more congruity between how they feel, as a woman, and how they look in their body. They like having the match of how they feel and how they look.
I think it makes it very interesting that they're willing to give up the sport for that.
Mm-hmm. And it helps alleviate some of the gender dysphoria.
And to that, I will take my hat off to them and I'll give them due credit, because that is definitely not an easy decision to make.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. James asked a question. Oh God, this could be a whole debate on itself, this question. Do you think it's okay for a child to transition before puberty? And that's to either of you, I think.
I think it is entirely between the child's parent, and the doctor. I am not a doctor and I don't know all of the medical and psychological issues, and I really think that needs to be left to a psychologist and a doctor.
Mm-hmm. Dave?
I am very skeptical about giving young children puberty blockers or hormone blockers. The child might be influenced from outside sources, from things that they're seeing, and I'm not talking about 5 years, I'm talking about maybe 11, 12, 13-year-olds. I think that some of them might be being, especially puberty is a very dangerous thing to mess with. I would caution the people, not against it, but to really look into it long and hard before making that decision.
Cool.
That's going to affect them for the rest of their life. So I do think it's not a decision that they should be taken lightly.
Okay. Martin Pendry says, how can you say a person's feelings is more important than another's safety? I'm not sure that's exactly what we said, but go on, do you want to tackle that, Godless Granny?
Yeah. And he's right. I did not express that well. And I was having trouble trying to find exactly the words that I was trying to express. Because what I was trying to say is that how a person feels about themselves and how they perceive themselves and how they perceive how society accepts them can be more injurious than physical injury. And what David brought out, with the suicide statistics is one evidence of that, because transgender people feel so marginalized and so unaccepted. The dysphoria, it causes so many mental issues for them that finding a way to include them and help them feel accepted, I think, is more important than making sure that they don't suffer a physical injury.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a question for Gladys, if I can.
Yeah.
How would you say would be a good way to go about including trans people in society? And I'm speaking in reference to the video you did with, I believe it's with Matt.
Mm-hmm. The biggest thing is to shut up all these religious kooks that say that transgender people should be killed outright. I mean, that's number one. There is so much hatred and bigotry against them. I was absolutely shocked at some of the figures that I have seen about especially Black transgender women. They face the biggest prejudice in this country. I've read about a case where a Black transgender woman was injured in a car accident, and when the ambulance came and they saw that she was trans, they just left her there to die, and she died. And that's the kind of discrimination that transgender people are feeling in this country. And I think we need to talk about them more. I think we need to talk to them more. I think we need to include them in discussions so that we get to know them and realize that they're people just like us.
Okay. We've got a question from Captain Quinn, and I think this is going back to the question you asked before, that Luke Mitchell asked about, if they're good enough question. Luke Mitchell says, how about we just let people prove themselves first, Dave? What do you think about that?
Are you able to pull up the PowerPoint? Or is that too much of an ask for you?
No, I think I can do it. Yeah, which slide?
Slide either 2 or 3.
2, yeah, 2's on.
Okay.
Or 3, which one?
Whichever one, it doesn't make a difference. Which one do you have on the screen?
I've got 3.
3. Okay, so that's the bench press. Okay. So the people talking about having someone prove themselves, what myself and Godless Granny have been talking about, also boils down to sport being inclusive and motivational. If you look at these results, look at what Brown Bonica was able to lift, and look at what Fidosenko Sergey from Russia was able to lift. There's no, when it comes to these bench pressing, squats, competitions that involve explosive power, there is currently at their level no competition. What this person is asking for is desegregation, and when that happens, you're going to lose representation for women. The woman will be relegated to also rans, also lifted, and it's going to take away from young girls and also potentially young trans people seeing their idol, seeing someone who's gone through similar things to them. You're taking that away from them, which is why I'm against desegregation, because it allows more representation, which is why we have these categories weren't thought up randomly. Is to make a more even playing field for people who are competing. And as I've said many times over this debate, someone who's going through male puberty has certain athletic advantages in a variety of sports, which means that, as I've said a few times now, hopefully someone else said, you've just lost a great chunk of people who can inspire a whole new generation.
Brilliant. So, Godless Granny, have you got anything to say on that one before we wrap things up? That was the last one?
Nope, I didn't have anything on that one.
Right, well, can I just thank you both, because it's been just great to sit back and listen to you. Again, it's, really, really articulate from both sides, really civil, really polite. I've really, really enjoyed it. Have you got anything that you want to shill out, any channels or anything that you want to advertise that I can put in the description, or?
Well, I have my channel, Godless Granny. I recently got monetized. I did a collab with Vice Rhino, and it just shot me through the roof on subscribers.
He's very good, he's Vice Rhino. Right, we'll make sure that goes in when I've sorted my technical issues out, whatever they are here. I don't even know I'm going to shut this stream down at the minute. But we'll make sure that goes in the description. Dave, I know we asked this last time, but again, have you got anything you want us to, put in the description, chill out for you?
Oh, no, I have nothing to show at the moment other than rugby.
I don't want to talk about that. No, that's brilliant. Guys,
actually, if I can show one thing real quick, on Tuesday at 1 o'clock Central, which is GMT -5, I will have Hemet Meta on my channel, because we saw something absolutely horrendous, which is that a public school in the state of Ohio has been been making PragerU videos as school assignments in the public school. And so we are going to be discussing that.
Right. No, that sounds like I don't know, whenever you get the link, if you email me the link when you've got it up to that video, I'll put that in the description as well. Brilliant. Okay. I'll shell out me and JL Warren doing the Halloween stream on the Conspiracy Catz channel next Saturday, which will be not decided a time yet, but it will be early evening UK time, late afternoon. Dave, anything else to say?
I'm just dumbfounded why they're making PragerU videos part of the curriculum.
It is extra credit. It's not required, but still, yes, I know. Yeah. The insanity in this country is mind-boggling. And
on that bombshell, I'll see if I can end the stream. I'm going to have to close it down in OBS and see if that works, because I can't, the analytics live studio thing's not working. So I'm going to hit end stream, but we might actually still be streaming. So Goodbye, everybody, unless this isn't goodbye, in which case it's not goodbye, but